And this is going to be a video telephonic conference. And to make certain that we've crossed all of our T's and dotted our I's, I'd like to make sure we have a quorum, and I will go through the order of Councilmember Orlando. Councilmember Carbon.
I'm here, Mayor.
Councilmember Little.
Here, Mayor.
Councilmember Hernandez.
Sir, I'm here, Mayor.
Councilmember Walker.
I'm here, Mayor.
And Councilmember Perez.
Here, Mayor.
And just to verify, Councilmember Councilmember Owens, not here, and Mayor Pro Tem, what kind of quorum do we have?
We have five, Councilman Orlando and Councilman Elwood for this.
And you can count me, so we are missing one.
This is Lou's back on. Councilman Orlando is present now, so we have six for him.
And pardon?
Councilman Orlando is present now, Mayor.
Okay, so we have quorum. Okay,
Yes,
I will make sure that the City Secretary records that I can certify that we have a quorum for this special council meeting. Moving in our agenda, I'll call this to order and move to the second item, which is purpose of the meeting, which is discussion of the city of Pearland's capital improvement program. And Councilman Little, would you pick up on the citizen comments?
Mayor, we have no citizens signed up to speak this morning, so we can go to item number 4.
Okay, moving to item 4, new business. And we have 2 items under new business, item 1 and item 2. I'll have Vice Pearson to introduce both of those and give us a staff report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and thanks for your additional time on a Saturday morning here. This meeting stems from our early budget input. Coming out of that, we made the suggestion that we carve out an extra session specifically on the capital improvement program to go through that at a level for the financing and looking at some of the future projects. This is a further extension, last couple of years, I believe, as part of our budget, rather than lumping the CIP with the entirety of the budget. We've pulled that forward and done that a month ahead in July. We plan on doing that again, so you'll see that in July. But this session this morning is to give you and plenty of time to understand and be comfortable with the entirety of this major investment package. The capital improvement program represents investments in infrastructure, fixed assets, facilities, materials that have a long useful life, and large expenditure and investment costs of capital. So these things take, in many cases, many years to come to fruition because of the necessity to not only finance them, but also to design and get all the partners lined up. One of the best evidence of that is from Monday night when Council awarded a construction contract for McCard Road extension between Cole and Makawa. I mean, that project was a decade in the making, primarily funded by outside federal money that flow through the state, but it's a huge improvement for mobility in Pearland, and that comes to fruition with that construction contract, and there's plenty of examples of that throughout this the CIP itself. So this morning we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about the financing structure. We're going to try to emphasize the timing of these and the projects that you have coming before you that would start in 21 and make sure that we're comfortable with those. But specifically this morning, we will talk to you about how we debt finance those and spend some time with the structure of that financing. So You've received the presentation slides ahead and as part of your package back on Tuesday or Wednesday, so you've had some time with that, and Mr. McCarter's going to walk you through all that now. So, Mr. McCarter.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Good morning, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here with you on this Saturday morning. As Mr. Pearson mentioned, we'll go over some financing structures and then talk about some projects, open it up for discussion. Before we dive in, I do want to thank Robert Upton, Tiffany Stoddard, and their group who did a lot of the legwork on the CIP itself, as well as Neely Walker on the budget side who frankly crunched all the numbers. So thank you to those folks. Want to dive in here, we can talk about how we're going to structure our conversation today. As Mr. Pearson mentioned in his introduction, this is a new session for us. Last year we had this as a discussion item on a regular city council agenda. I believe that was in July. So this time in June, we're getting a little bit earlier start. We're here on a Saturday morning to have some dedicated time specifically to talk about this very important document and kind of go over our process as a whole. So we'll start there with the process and talk about where we are in the process now and where we're going to go in the future and what decisions made today look like a year from now. Then we'll start with the property tax fact debt issuance. This is really everything backed by property taxes. So this is the debt component of the rate. We'll start with some background about the legal component of that and then move into our ability to pay. After that, we'll talk about some historical projections and how that looks compared to where we are now. And then we'll talk about our most recent current projections. And then we will have a decision that needs to be made today at the discussion at the end of the session regarding structure versus level principle on future issuances. I'll get into those details a little later. And then we'll talk about some financial considerations when talking about reprioritizing projects and things like that. And then we'll open this up for an overview on the capital project side from Mr. Upton, and then the discussion from City Council. And then we'll open section. This is not backed by property tax and sustained by our water and sewer rate. We'll do a similar background in the process overview, and then open it up for overview from Mr. Upton again and discussion from City Council. So, talking about our process as a whole and how we got to where we are today and where we're going. We are in the early stages of planning here. You can see here, when you look at the overall really debt financing process, we're in the first stage here. Right here, we divided this into three. First, our policy and planning stage. This began back in February 2020 at our early budget input session. Over the last few years, we've made it a habit of having a recurring capital financing white paper where we make recommendations on some changes to how we issue debt and how we can be better at proactively managing that. We talk about our rate projection, the types of debt. It's about a 10-page paper. So we go through all that at that point and get feedback. That leads us to today, our CIP presentation and discussion happening this year in June 2020. We will bring this back on the 27th of July at the second meeting next month for another discussion and hopefully an adoption of the CIP there. And that really kind of solidifies the plan, if you will. It locks down the timing of the projects for us to enter into the next phase, which is execution. So after we've gotten our direction, we being staff, we take that CIP and roll it into a budget document. The FY21 budget is presented August 1st pursuant to our charter. We have 3 budget discussions, 2 public hearings, and 2 readings of that budget, all scheduled over August and September, ultimately leading to the adoption of the FY21 budget in September 2020. A legal requirement that budget contains the FY21 issuances of debt, which is next year's project. From there, in October 2020, the last step in our execution phase really laid the groundwork for us to proceed with those projects as an intent to reimburse, which is approved by City Council, usually the first meeting in October, and that authorizes Mr. Upton and his group to start work on those projects and start bringing those contracts so we can get ahead of the game before we enter the final phase, which is the operational phase. that really is May 2021 when we will bring an annual debt issuance for your consideration. That debt issuance should look a lot like the intent to reimburse that we approved in October 2020. Those amounts will be either at or under those intent to reimburse amounts projects. And then we enter into June 2021, exactly a year from now. That's when we post legal notices. We're on ratings calls and doing due diligence and all the stuff behind the scenes to make the debt issuance happen. And then July 2021, we'll actually sell that debt. So we'll have John Roebuck and his firm go out and do their thing for us and do the debt sale and bring back the results to the City Council in July 2021. And then finally, 2022, the payments for the 21 issuance begin. This is worth underlining, and you'll hear me say this a few times today, that decisions that are made today about fiscal year 2021 debt issuances will take effect, right, and have the impact on our tax rate in 22, fiscal year 22. And I know that's a little bit confusing because we haven't, proposed the FY21 budget yet, but the debt payments don't start until a year after the issuance. So the debt we issue in July 2021, we won't see those payments until 2022. So we'll talk a lot today about the 22 tax rate. And I'll get into some more details about that, and we can answer any questions you have to make sure we're all clear on how that works out. So starting with our property tax tax debt issuances, the first point is probably the most important on this slide. The city is legally required to levy a debt service tax rate to generate enough revenue to pay for debt service obligations. So whatever we issue, we have to pay for it. The debt service component is separate and distinct from the O&M portion of the rate, not subject to rollback or effective rate calculations. We'll get into the actual calculation itself in a minute. I'll reiterate again here, the timing is such that the debt issuance or debt service amount for the upcoming FY21 is already fixed. So the sale that's currently in place is going to dictate our FY21. Today we're going to focus on FY22. Because today the discussions and planning will be the issuance for 21 and then the payments for 22. Now the green box we have here is really a very, very simplified version of a 7-page long state mandated tax rate calculation worksheet that we complete every year. And the formula for the debt rate, when you get down to it, is pretty simple. It's the value as of January 1st times the debt service rate divided by 100 equals the debt service fund revenue. And if you think about the components that we know now in our plan, we know roughly what the debt service fund revenue is going to need to be, because we know what the principal amount is. We'll make, based on market, we'll make an estimate on the interest, so we know how much revenue we're going to need. We also have a good idea of the value, and built into our projections is an 8% increase in 21 and a 4.5% increase in 22. So understanding that we know those two components, we basically just do a little bit of algebra and we back into that debt service tax rate. And we'll talk in specifics about how that projection comes together a little bit later in the presentation. The slide that we always point to and really focus on in terms of our ability to pay for property tax future issuances is our debt to assessed value. We use that assessed value because that's what the whole tax rate calculation is based off of. And you can see here, we are far below, almost 2% below, 2 percentage points below, rather, 1.8 percentage points below where we were in fiscal year 2012. And we've remained more or less steady at that 3%, hovering right around that 3% since fiscal year 2018. Light blue column is what we are having come up here in FY21. Like we said, that's pretty much fixed because we are in the final processes of selling that debt. What we're talking about today is really fiscal year 2022. And you see that going up to the 3.4%, still well below 5%, which is a general rule of thumb, kind of the max you want to be at for this, according to some of the bond rating agencies and financial advisors and such. But we do see this uptick here really driven by two things. First, we have the 2029 bond project. Those were voter approved back in, I believe it was May 2019. And then we have the TERS project. So the TERS projects are unique in that we're not paying principal on those. until the church closes out in 2029. It's interest-only payments. So while issuing that debt does increase our debt to assessed value rate, the payments themselves are not as high as our standard payments, and I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Hey, John, let me interrupt for a minute. I'm getting some messages from people saying that the audio is not very good. Is there anything we can do about that, Josh?
Yes, sir. There's a little bit of an echo. We're working on it. It's not as bad on the cable channel as it is on the streaming service, but we're trying to troubleshoot now.
Josh, is that my phone that's doing that, or is that something else?
That we're not really sure.
Hey, Gary, I just checked the feed. Yeah, it's got a lot of on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. So we're trying to swap something out real quick.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Is it going to be something that you can troubleshoot quickly that we can pause while it's troubleshoot, or should we continue?
I
don't
would.
I don't want the public to feel like, they're not able to follow along.
Yeah, understood. Let me check with Joe real quick and see if the what we're trying is going to solve it. Give me just 2 minutes.
I will stand by.
Yeah, it's audible. It's just reverberating.
And Gary, maybe if you could share the cable link, if that one is better.
He had it all timed perfectly and was screwed up.
He was on a good roll.
Much better. But it's back on YouTube.
I think the public will be at least somewhat happy that we're trying to fix the problem so they can follow along. So I think just you trying to get it fixed, and hopefully we'll follow up with that and get it fixed for future meetings. So, you know. Cool.
Mayor, let's proceed.
Can I clarify, is the recording of the video going to be whatever's being streamed to YouTube right now? That's the recording that's going to be available in the future, or will that be a higher quality, like the one that we're receiving right now? I just saw another recording kick in, maybe, so maybe.
Joshua?
Yeah, we'll actually have multiple backups of the recording. So we recorded to YouTube as well as to SD card in the room and on WebEx as well. So we should have a higher quality version when everything's said and done. We can upload.
Great. Okay. Yeah, not preferable, but as long as we can make sure that's still available and people can, you know, hear it more easily, then I think that might be the best option at this point. Just move forward.
And maybe we can come in afterwards and re-record all our lines.
Is there any way that we can make sure that everybody's speaking, you know, a little bit louder maybe so that it, you know, we can compensate for some of that? Or speaking closer into the microphone?
It is more of an echo, so I don't think speaking louder will have a significant difference. I would just try to speak clearly to enunciate and yeah, just try to enunciate as much as possible.
Enunciate as well as make sure your microphone is muted when you're not speaking. Usually. I mean, I think we're good to go. If you're okay to let Sean proceed.
This is Mayor Pro Tem Little, John MacArthur. Why don't you go ahead
Yes, sir, will do. So, get back into things here. The first decision that we need made today, and we'll open it up for discussion after the presentation, but is structured versus level principle. And just some background here. Currently, the city has about $2.7 billion in valuation within FERS number 2, that's tax increment refinancing zone number 2. We do not receive property tax revenue from this valuation. Instead, we receive what's called an administrative fee, and that comes into the general fund side. So we get about 64% of the total property tax revenue that comes into the general fund, not the debt service fund. So that administrative fee is only for operations, things, salaries, and things like that, and it's not used for debt service. In 2029, the FERS will expire, and the full valuation of that FERS comes onto the city's property tax roll. When that happens, we're projecting we'll have an additional $3+ billion in valuation that will be available for debt service. So that result of that is the property tax debt service tax rate will come down significantly. There was some discussion at early budget input session this year around potentially structuring the principal in such a way to smooth out that drop with the FERS, and so this is bringing that back after that that request was made by City Council. And here's what that looks like. The chart on the right-hand side shows us a 10-year projection, 11-year projection, with the growth values here, what we're assuming for the valuation growth. You can see the 8% in FY21 that we talked about earlier, the 4.5% in 22 and 23, and then taper off in the out years after that. The first column is level principal. So this is our current approach on how we have issued debt historically. There was a discussion around how we structure our debt issuance back in, I believe it was fiscal year 2017 at the early budget input session. And council gave direction that we want to see level principal. The advantage to level principal is that the principal amount gets paid faster because you're paying the exact same amount over the whole life of the debt, the whole 20 years of the debt. You're going to see the same amount paid, and the interest tapers off as you go along. So as a result, you see the bond has decreasing debt payments over the life of the debt. We see reduced interest costs relative to the structured principal option. The downside is we really don't have any flexibility to manage the tax rate. It kind of is what it is. If you move over to the next column, the structured principal option, you can see that the debt rate is lower between now and 2029. That's because the principal amounts vary in this structure. We had our financial advisor, John Roebuck, put something together for us that would basically match the 44.5 max tax rate that we shared at the early budget input session. These bonds are essentially structured around our existing debt to help us get the tax rate down before 2029 and manage that drop so it's not as sharp heading into to 2030. We do see potentially higher interest costs due to the deferred principal payments. Estimate in this projection is about $13 million cumulative interest over the 20-year life of the debt. The big advantage is, like we said, it's the flexibility to manage that tax rate to even it out over the course of that really major change in what our valuation looks like. We will open this up for discussion at the close of this first section, but we do need direction today. And we have a policy amendment either way as our number 2 item on the agenda today. Should future issuances be structured with level or structured principal? We'll return to this discussion point at the end of the presentation. Just want to get this on your radar now. Next, we want to talk about historical tax rate projections. So we share an updated projection at several points throughout the course of the fiscal year. We want to just throw these up on the screen here for some context and see where we've come over the last year. If you look at the first column here, the 2019 bond materials, we were at 48.75 as our max tax rate. That's what was published in the materials that we put out for voter information. And then we see that coming down pretty steadily with the FY 2020 adopted max tax rate at 45.50, and now we see next year's tax rate coming down to 43.25, and a slight change into 22 for the latest CIP that we have here today. So that begs the question: what changed? Why have we changed over the last year? So the first thing that changes is the issuance amount. The 2019 bond issuance or bond materials were based on an intent to reimburse that was approved by City Council in 2018. We have issued less debt since then than we anticipated, so the issuance amounts have come down. Staff did reduce the FY21 issuance amounts just over the last few weeks to get the FY22 rate flat with the FY21 rate, just to keep us steady in those first 2 out years. So that was an intentional decision made internally. Probably the biggest factor is the AV growth, the assessed value growth. The 8% preliminary assessed value growth in 21 is much higher than we thought it would be in our previous models. And in last year's assessed value, we saw just under 6% growth. So we were thinking that might come down to 4.5%. We want to be conservative on those projections. So that changes things in our projections. Second, future year assessed value growth. The out year growth is really lowered by 1% or 0.5% annually as we go out, and that came down from our projection last time, just again to be conservative on that. Lastly, I just want to point out the ratio of the O&M rate to the debt rate in the current budget is 41%. We will have a discussion regarding a target ratio for that at our next early budget input session, so we can roll that into our policies and our planning and be consistent with what council wants to see. So there's a lot of information on this slide here. I'm going to cover it. I won't get on every bit of it. But this is essentially several different scenarios that are put together, ranging from our current proposed CIP all the way to a max tax rate that's level with what we're projecting for fiscal year 21. Starting with the first column here, or just a general note on the layout of this whole document here. The cells that you see in dark green are highlighted for a reason. We talked about several times in the introductory that the decisions that we're making today about the fiscal year 2021 issuances are going to lead to the debt rate in 22. So you can see those two are highlighted in different years. That's intentional, just to draw your attention to the fact that if you change an issuance in 21, you will see the change in 22. And then the out years are highlighted in green, obviously, because all of that is a part of this plan as well and on the table. Anything that's highlighted in red means that we have to reduce to get to the amount to match that tax rate. And then anything in green means we have some more capacity there in that year to move some issuances there. So we have, starting here, our level principal current proposed CIP. So this is following our standard procedures on how we issue debt, and just using the proposed CIP that we have attached to the agenda item today. The second column should look familiar because it's the structured principle we showed on 2 slides ago. This is the current proposed CIP, no changes. It's just that we have structured the debt in such a way as to match the 44.5 cent target. Moving along to the next slide, or the next column, this is if we maintain our level principle, so we don't do any changes to how we structure our issuances, but we want a max tax rate of 44.50. And then lastly, the same thing, level principle, we don't change anything about our policy, so we want a max tax rate of 43.25. Just some scenarios here for some context for everybody who's on the call today and watching at home about what types of changes would need to happen to get a certain max tax rate. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, but this is a good summary here. I will add, and it's noted at the bottom, that our debt tax rate always includes MUD rebates. There's about $7.6 million worth in our FY20 budget. We're projecting those to incrementally increase as the values increase within those MUDs until they expire. Those are all based on the MUD agreements with those specific MUDs. But those are here, so it's not just the debt issuances that drive the tax rate here. So my last slide here before I hand it over to Mr. Upton to talk about our projects themselves. Just a few financial considerations when reordering projects or reprioritizing is probably the better word to use our projects. First, the FERS reimbursable COs are interest only until the balloon payment in 2029. So if we remove those, it's going to make less of an interest on the tax, or less of a difference on the tax rate because we're paying interest only. We don't see the principal payment, which makes up a larger piece of our debt service. So they're just, if you're thinking about moving a project to get the tax rate down, it's just not worth as much. Second, and I would argue just as importantly, the city gets in line for reimbursement only when those projects are completed. So if we push that project back a year, we will move back further in line for reimbursement. So our approach to this has been to get those FERS projects done as soon as possible. We don't recommend changing that. And then second, several of these projects leverage outside funding. Mr. Pearson mentioned in his introduction McCarg, which is a great example. We got that funding because we put up City of Pearland matching funds. And if we move some of those projects that leverage outside funding, we could lose that outside funding, even if we just move the timing of the issuance. Mr. Upton knows all about that and can speak to that. His group leads a lot of the outside money coming in, does a great job with that. But that's something that we really need to be cognizant of as we talk about what we're doing with those projects. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Robert Upton and take it from here.
Well, thank you, Mr. McCarter. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Well, before we take a quick look at the list of projects that we proposed for the fiscal year 21, but also then just a quick review of those that are in process for fiscal year 20. At this time, I'd just like to review a few things that are on your screen there that staff has been working on. And to continue our discussion that has been mentioned by Mr. Pearson and by Mr. McCarter, the staff has been working quite diligently to evaluate. I apologize. Can you all see me now? Yes. All right, great. Is that
Robert, your mic is not
yes.
very clear.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Much better, thank you.
How's that? Is that there we are.
A lot better, Robert.
Thank you. I apologize. Thank you for the feedback. So let me just continue. Is that as Mr. Pearson and Mr. McCarter has stated, is that staff has been working diligently to evaluate all of our current fiscal year 20 projects that are in process, and also the proposed fiscal year 21 projects. Taking a look at each of those projects associated with scheduling, when we're looking to bid the project, and also the financial needs as that project is proceeding through the process. So we looked at each of those and worked together to review that funding needs and those obligations. So each of those projects were based and looked at what staff is taking a look at for 43.25% level tax rate, as was presented by Mr. McCarter. And then we adjusted those funding obligations and needs for those certificates of obligation and general obligations from the fiscal year, from the May 2019 bond program. So as we continue to do this, what happened is that resulted in a few of our projects and their funding obligations to move among the fiscal years and moving out to fiscal year 22. But having to be funded with additional funding obligations that would impact other projects. Next slide, please. So with that, this is the list of projects that have been funded in 2020, as described by Mr. McCarter. You'll see that they were put forth. Many of them are associated with the TERS project at the beginning, and we talked about funding obligations and partnerships with TxDOT and other agencies. And then from moving down from there was also some of our bond projects that have all been kicked off for the 2019 bond program. And then starts taking a look at the fiscal year 21 projects. In that, the proposed fiscal year 21 debt issuance also matches up with what Mr. McCarter provided on the sheet, on the slide several slides ago, showing that with this plan moving forward that staff has worked on, we can maintain that 43.25% level tax rate. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and return the presentation to conclude and head towards conclusion of section 1 back to Mr. McCarter for some further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Upton. So at this point, we'd like to open it up for City Council discussion. Obviously, the fiscal year 22 tax rate and feedback on the projection that we put forth is appreciated. And there is really two specific and distinct decision points that we need today. The first is discussion and direction on the structured versus level principle for future issuances and for our planning purposes on the tax rate projection. And then the second is discussion and direction on prioritization of any tax-backed projects. I will say we'll get to the water and sewer component in the next piece. For now, we'll just stick with the tax-backed. So with that, Mr. Pearson, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, John. Again, Mayor and Council, I want to thank my staff colleagues. I think they've done a great extra job with everything else going on and putting this together so it's understandable. It's important to look long-term, and these projects that are being accomplished are definitely things that will aid Pearland for the long haul. So I won't add anything else, just turn it back to you, Council, for feedback and discussion. Thank you.
Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll lead it off.
All right, good. Thank you, Tony.
All right. I guess first of all, thank you for putting all this together around the structured bond issuance.
you know, with the TERS, it's always been this some futuristic, mythical thing, but it's the ending of it is coming sooner rather than later. Finally, I mean, it's been a successful partnership. I'm inclined to lead towards the structured principle. I mean, it gives us gives taxpayers the rate relief over the next few years. It allows us to get the CIP program accomplished without raising the debt service tax rate. And from I guess a multi-year kind of equity, is it fair to current citizens to pay this, you could say, artificially higher rate over the next few years, and then have this big cliff fall off out in 2030 or whenever the TERS falls off? So I'm in favor of the structured principle. And then in terms of the projects on slide 13, I appreciate that slide and kind of that matrix. When you go through there and you look at everything that's TERS, meaning we're going to get refunded, GLO, AFA tip, I mean, there's only a few projects that, in my mind, make any sense to even have a discussion on, which would be, I guess, Fire Station 4 replacement. I mean, that's all our money, and it's coming off COs. And then I think the police training center. I'm not a fan of moving those. I like them in there in the current CIP, but everything else is either in process or we're getting substantial funds from somewhere else. So that's my comments. And again, I wanted to thank McCarter for putting all this together. And I think it certainly makes sense. Once, I guess the question, or my only caveat is, once we do go to the market, if we get feedback from our financial advisors and said, hey, this structured principle is creating, I guess, big rate variances, then potentially we can have that discussion in the future. But I guess, have you received any feedback, staff, in terms of, are we going to see varying rates because we're doing a structured principle issuance?
No, we have not. And I think the upside of, if we change our financial management policies to say that we want to allow structured principle going forward, that opens the door to, we can structure it however we like. So it's not necessarily the interest rate that's going to change, it's the rate that you're paying off the principal that's going to change. And we have absolute flexibility to do really what we need to make that make sense for us. So there's some flexibility built in there by including that language, and our financial advisor can advise us on that every year to make sure we're making smart decisions.
Thank you.
So I guess some of my questions were, first off, I agree that with the structured principle rate, because it allows us to not have to increase the debt rate. But some of my questions were on slide 13. When we look at some of these projects in the critical ranking, some of them are rated as a 3, which is can be postponed with only moderate inconvenience. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those with the economic time frame we're in and all the uncertainty going forward. Would it bias anything by looking at not, I guess, postponing or delaying these for a little while, not completely an entire year, but for looking at what kind of time frame we could postpone these without having to have any kind of setback with any other project that would be tied to it, or even a cost variance on getting the project done.
Let me start out that, and others can add. when looking at those, that set, I think Member Carbone, illustrated, the matrix and factors that go into that. But when I look at those, if you want to look at the threes, the only one of value substance dollar-wise that would, even maybe hint at moving the needle is, that Bailey Road work. But, there again, that was a voter-approved bond project. And, you alluded to it and recognized that, but, the costs increase. So, you don't have the improvement and, the inflation factors, you can't get around. So, if you're going to look at those, that Bailey one would be the only one that I might think, doesn't. The rest of them, I mean, I wouldn't personally recommend the pump station generator, just drainage-wise, the communications fiber, the Wilkes, and those aren't larger amounts. Others, Robert, or you want to correct me on any of that or add to that?
Sure, Mr. Pearson. Just to add to it is that Mr. Pearson is correct with regards to the Bailey Road. The Cowers Creek pump station generator is needed, but that is one project we did move out to 2022. Stepping back to the Bailey Road, if you take a look at the top of the slide, it says future debt fiscal year 22 and beyond. That debt service is actually spread across fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 due to the length of time that the project will take to be built. The fiber backbone project, why there's no funding in there is that is a cash-funded project, so the money's already on hand. We're just waiting till we get to that project to be approved. And then with the park equipment recapitalization, we've moved that one out into fiscal year 22 as well. So we're trying to move a few things here and there, but it doesn't move a lot of the needle. These are smaller projects and associated with those. So those are the stated aspect that could be with little or moderate inconvenience, but as Mr. Pearson stated, as we're starting to see in the market forecasted out, is that cost will start to rise back up again to be able to construct these projects.
Yeah, and that's not something that I want to do. I mean, that doesn't benefit us in the long run. I'm not trying to push a project and have increased or inflated costs because we pushed it out so far. It's just, I'm trying to look at things to see where we can make, smart decisions on either delaying a project and it not affect us too greatly on cost or services. So just some questions there on those, but I appreciate this presentation. I don't want to kick the can down the road and 3 years or 4 or 5 years from now we're paying an inflated rate on these projects that some of them bond approved projects that we have to do. I'm in favor of getting them done. As council, we approved several years ago that we wanted bond projects to be started within a 3-year time period so that we didn't incur inflated rates on these. So I like it, and I like the structured principle so that we can keep that debt rate the same, and just looking forward to trying to keep this debt at where it is or below, so that when that TERS pays off, we'll be in a really good position and add a lot of money back to the general fund to where we can start doing a lot more things with cash on hand. So thank you very much.
And remember, we're just want to make sure we don't lose the point from the rest of the presentation. There's so much here, but if the consensus is and we adopt a policy with the structure, that allows for that rate target that's on the order of magnitude of 4 or 5 cents below what we looked at in 19 and before. So it's all a good, and it's talking about keeping that flat, and we'll work to even lower it below that if at all possible.
Hey, John, this is Councilman Little. I've got a question on the slide on page 10 where you show the different tax rates. With the level principal and the max rate at 44.5 cents, you're anticipating removing little over $21.5 million from the capital plan, but it doesn't lower the tax rate any more than the structured principal just to the left of it. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. Great question. So the way it's because of the way the payments are structured. The structured principal, so we're looking at the second column here. We've changed the way that the principal is being paid back. So you're paying less principal over the years that we're showing here. And that's why you have more capacity here. So that's why the rate comes down, like you said, to match these two columns, but the amount doesn't change because you're issuing the same amount. You're just paying the principal later. And we're structuring that so we're paying more of it after 2029 when the TERS comes on board. So it's about the structure of the payment, not the amount of the debt necessarily.
But it doesn't lower the rate any, so there's really no advantage to the taxpayers in the current years, the next couple of years.
I mean, the advantage is that we can issue, we can continue with the CIP as presented with a lower tax rate. So I think the comparison might be between the level principal current proposed CIP in the first column and the structured principal current proposed CIP. Those have the same amount of issuance. Here, the difference is the rate. And you can see these two, it's 3.25% difference on the rate. And then if you move into the third column, we would have to drop $21 million if we stay level principal and we want to be at 44.50 on the tax rate. Does that make sense?
Well, you've got the same tax rate in the column to the left of that under the structured principal that you do on the level principal, maintaining a max rate of 44.5 cents. So you're reducing your, am I missing something here? I'm looking at it and the rates seem to be the same from one column to the next.
Hey, John, if you go back to slide 8 in my mind is a little bit more simple way to think about it. If we do level principal in the years 23 through 26, we're going to have higher rates. And then the cliff down when we go from 29 to 30, that's a big cliff. Versus the structured principal, we're taking the peak off from 23 to 26, and it's not as big of a drop off when we hit years 29 and 30. So we're funding the same CIP. It's just we're reducing the principal payments over the kind of the 23 to 26 time frame and deferring them out to the 29 and future where we have that TERS value come on. So it's kind of, I know everybody's tired of hearing flattening the curve, but we're structuring the bonds to flatten the curve between 23 and 26.
Thank you, Councilman Carbone, for that excellent explanation. No, that makes sense. We're just deferring until the later years. We want the advantage now under the structured principal versus a higher tax rate later on, or the opposite under the level principal option. That's all I have for now.
Mayor, if I can. So first, I want to split up maybe a little bit into two discussions. One, the level versus structure, and Clay, maybe giving some guidance. Do you want to dig into the actual projects in the CIP a little later in the presentation, or do you want to start looking at that now?
Well, I think the theme is, we're open, obviously, to giving you updates. I mean, we do provide those, but the structure matters a lot for what can be accomplished. And if there's a consensus building and we're going to act towards the structured principle, that would allow for the CIP to be accomplished as it's been planned and presented. Obviously, we get that updated. We'll bring that to you in July. But the projects that are coming up that you're interested or you want us to follow up with, we'd be happy to hear about that and either answer any questions or bring that back to you in follow up. So
do you want us to go through that now, or do you want us to go through that later in the presentation?
I think we're here and we're ready, and Robert's available. So please, if you got a question, go ahead.
Perfect. So I'll start with the level versus structure. I'm not really a fan of the structured, mostly because it does end up being it does end up costing the taxpayers more in the long run. I appreciate that it allows us some flexibility with the tax rate and some bond capacity probably in the interim till 2029, which is the target we know where we get a lot of relief when the TERS comes off. But in the end, at least according to the write-up, and I know it's relatively loose math at this point, it's a $13 million hit to the taxpayers. That all goes to the people who own our debt. It's not like we're taking $13 million and programming it back into the city. So I'm not sold yet on the structured plan for those reasons, and I could probably be convinced of that, but right now I'm just not seeing the overall benefit. I mean, if it's just so when we get to 2029, the cliff isn't as deep, and it's a positive cliff, you know, we're lowering the rate from right now what's projected 40.85 to 39.25 as opposed to going from 38.75 to 38.50. I mean, to me, that's not. When you look at the overall cost to the individual taxpayer over that year, that rate's not that significant to the actual value that they pay. So I just don't see, at least from my perspective, as much benefit in the structured plan versus the level plan. I'd rather try and get us to pay off the principal as quickly as we can and have the additional debt capacity because we have paid off so much principal we owe less as opposed to paying more in interest. John, please help me if I'm oversimplifying anything with those talking points.
No, I mean, that's, here, I'll put that slide back up. All right, I moved that. But, you know, I think the only caveat I would add is that the $13 million is over 20 years, so it's not all at once, but.
No, I get that. I get that. I mean, I'm not, and 13 million, I mean, you can trivialize 13 million with respect to the overall AB of the city, all tax value. I mean, certainly it's not a large percentage of our general revenue, but I think I would need to get over that hurdle. I need to see maybe possibly some more benefit to the structured plan other than just flattening things out over the next 10 years. Also, John, if you could help me to understand if we do end up introducing a rate cap, if we do it, sorry, something happened. If we do introduce a rate cap to the debt service with respect to the tax rate, let's say for the value that I've used in the past, we cap our debt rate at 50% of our total tax rate. How does that affect the level versus structured plan strategy over the next few years?
Well, I think with the structured plan, you just have a lot more flexibility on what the debt rate is going to be. If you have it as the level principal, it is what it is, and we control it by issuing less debt. With the structured principal, you can structure that principal around the tax rate to an extent. I mean, obviously, you can't just do whatever you want, but you have more flexibility with the structured principal option. That's the advantage.
So, would it be correct in saying if we move to a cap and we manage the cap, let's say over a 5-year plan, a cap being, you know, let's say again, just for consistency, the value I've used before, we say 50% of the tax rate, no more than 50% of the tax rate can go through debt. With the structured plan, we are more likely to be able to meet that goal without having to make significant sacrifice for projects. The consequence is we're spreading interest payments over time and potentially costing us more over time.
I think that would be fair to say. You know, we haven't really covered the O&M piece, which is the other side of that, but yes, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd add is that you can see there I mean, if that is a goal, just as a target, you wouldn't be able to even touch, that the operation side would require much more that, until like at least 27 on this sheet. So,
and I think that's the structure of that conversation, and how do we get there. The timing of how we get there is extraordinarily important, but probably not necessarily what we can discuss right now. I am more applying that. I'm more willing to go with the structured plan if it allows us to meet that metric. So if the level plan hampers our ability to reduce our tax or our debt value to our tax rate, then I'm okay with doing structured plan, but possibly having some potential future conversations about maybe interest only payments when we have mid-year rate adjustments. If we end up having in 2022, 2023, more sales tax, more property tax, something that allows us to have more revenue available, potentially using that as an option to go after interest only on some of the debt, if that's an option. Anything there that's oversimplified, John?
But I think what you just touched on the end there would be, I wouldn't recommend that, but I'd want to write that out and explain that. That just for the amount to be available and the minimal impact, and trying to mix the operations levy into that or other kind of operating revenues that are already strapped. I couldn't see that, but.
I appreciate it. Maybe you and I are seeing things differently, and I don't want to tie our hands into that being what we are doing now. But I think it's worthy of the discussion. If we go with the structured plan and we know it costs us more interest over time, then how do we make that? How do we? And I said interest only. I meant principal only payments in the future. I apologize. But how do we? How do we manage that to maybe offset some of the costs in the future? And I totally understand it can be, I'm oversimplifying it right now, but maybe it's a discussion point for us to consider in the future. So I can buy off on the structured plan if it helps us to get to that debt rate cap. The other question would be, are we making any assumptions over the next 10-year plan about a future bond issuance? Are we looking at a 2024, 2025 bond? Have we programmed that into that rate, or are we assuming no bond issuance over that time period?
So in your packets, in that CIP summary sheets, there is out there, some projects that don't have a separate funding that say future bond packages. That's out there. So, the 24, 25, but that's just placeholders and to have something out there.
But with the rates that we're evaluating for level and structured, is that to assume? Is there anything built into those rate structures that is assumed or does not assume a bond issuance?
John, there's nothing in there, correct? Is that right? He's checking.
So we have Neely Walker on the line, connected.
Hey,
Mr. Pearson? Mr. Pearson, just to add is that in the CIP, if you'll take a look, Councilman Perez, that there are, in those individual categories, there are some, a placeholder for preliminary engineering reports to be done, so that we can take a look at those projects in 2024 to schedule out for a maybe 25 or 26 bond type program. But we're planning to try and take a look at those in 24, 25 to start scheduling that out.
And that's kind of what I understood from the write-up, bond issuance in that time frame. So I'm just trying to make sure if we're looking at a structured plan, how static is that plan with respect to bond issuance. So we're making decisions based on tax rates going supremely, or debt tax rates going down supremely in 2029. Just affect that.
So I'm looking at the total summary page here, and there's the future GO bond package built in with 1.2 million in 24 and 10 million in 25, and that would be rolled up into the tax rate projection that you're seeing here.
Okay. But it's not a $10 million bond. We would probably be looking like $100 million as a bond issuance spread over 5 years. So we did 2025, we'd be looking at a bond issuance probably between 80 and 120 million, potentially based on, you know, the scope of some of the projects we each have. And the others, I think, at least I imagine we would probably be looking at the debt rate from 25 to 30. So
yeah,
I just,
so that is, the amount in there is just kind of what we've come up with so far of what would be in that package, not the full scope of the package. So it's just a small piece of what that could be.
so would it be fair to say if we do the structured plan that allows us more flexibility to do a bond issuance in 25 without having a significant effect on the rate?
Yeah, because it gives us the ability to structure the principal payments around what we want to see on the tax rate side.
But I want to be clear, though, that may be a small consequence. It's not the purpose. I mean, there's lots of reasons I think that we're suggesting, or if you want a recommendation, looking at the change. It's for more of what the impact is on slide 8 to the rates, and remember Carbone, you know, described the people that are here now and, you know, paying that additional difference versus spreading that out. I mean, that to me is more the policy recommendation that we'd have versus, you know, any other options for, you know, future projects.
Yeah, and I think we're probably saying somewhat the same thing, Clay. If we're going to go with the structured rate and there's a consequence of additional cost, then what's the benefit? And I think at least I'm having a better understanding of what the benefits are for the structured rates for future planning and for future for the debt rate cap that I've wanted to introduce for a little while. So for those reasons, I think I'm okay with the structured plan. Robert, if I could borrow you on a couple of CIP projects. Looking at the 2024 CIP program versus what's presented here for the 21-25. There have been some projects that were added. Just wanted some clarification on scope and the timing. So on drainage, we can go to that summary. And we go to that slide, the drainage CIP summary.
Is this what you're looking for?
Yes, sir. Robert, we've got 2 Hickory Slough regional ponds that are programmed 2020-2021. And actually, the Hickory Slough Detention Pond Phase 2 is programmed out to 23-24. But this other Hickory Slough Regional Pond, I don't remember seeing anything on that before. I could be wrong. It's not in the 2024 bond, so, or in the CIP package for 2021 to 2024. So can you just maybe provide me some clarification on the scope of that project and what it's intended to relieve, its funding mechanism, and why that's getting moved to this year?
Councilman Perez, that particular project is actually a partnership with Brazoria Drainage District number 4. As a result of the McCard project, there was a piece of land that was about 56 acres in total. We had purchased a portion of it through condemnation for the detention needs for the McCard project. The owner of the property then in turn sold it to in a partnership to the city and Brazoria Drainage District number 4, where we purchased that at a 50-50 rate. This portion is for Brazoria Drainage District to take the lead and go ahead and dig out the remaining acreage of that to create a regional detention pond along the Hickory Slough, right around, I need to remember my roads, but I believe it's along O'Day and Woody, or Woody Road, right around in there where our current pond is. and that'll give us just regional capacity in the Hickory Slough area that is much needed. So that is a partnership with them, and we're funding and working together at a 50-50 percentage rate. In the augmentation that's been presented before you in this presentation, we actually moved that $3 million out to fiscal year 2022 in coordination to reimburse the work that that partnership has generated.
And remember, to add to that, where the property has been acquired, there's not a definitive timeline on that. We did the interlocal agreement to purchase the property, and that included a partnership to construct the property. But as far as the timeline on building that, DD4 does want to move forward, so we wanted to start planning for that with, when our funds are available and when the reimbursement is still subject to the timing of that project and when our funds are available.
So it's a cost share with DD4 that's tied to the McCart expansion.
Well, it's not tied to the McCart Road itself. It was an opportunity to acquire a larger piece of property, as opposed to just a portion of it for the McCart Road project. And then it meets some of the drainage requirements identified in our master drainage plan for that segment of Hickory Slough.
Okay. And the portion that we have right now for 2020, the 1.6 million, is that just a placeholder? Do we know for sure that that's the value? And is this PER engineering and maybe some CMR costs, or is that assuming some construction within this year?
I'm guessing that was the purchase price on the property, but I'll let someone else confirm that.
Mr. Epperson, that's correct. That was the purchase price of the property that the city funded, and then received then reimbursement back by Missouri Drainage District, but that was the portion that was funded. Okay,
so the $3 million on 2021 is in design and beginning construction?
That would be correct, as we're still negotiating with the Drainage District right now.
Okay. All right, and then Brooklyn Acres, that one's new. Can you give me some history on that?
Well, let me just tie all three of those, Brooklyn Acres, Garden Road, and the Woody Road drainage. Those are all private, or not private, but all grant funded through the GLO. That was money that we received through the work of Mr. Hardy, and about $2.6 million in that area. And so those three projects were identified in the CDBG area that were then fully funded at 100% and no participation by the city for GLO to provide that fund.
Perfect. Okay, so with respect to parks, which is, I think, is the next one, we could go to that slide, that summary.
Can you repeat that one more time, Mr. Councilmember?
The parks CIP project list. Let's see, here we go.
Bring it right back for you.
Perfect. So I believe what I'm seeing that the park recapitalization program's gotten split up into 3 different projects, and just help me understand why the rationale behind that.
Councilman Perez, that was associated with our funding ability to fund those projects over those years. And so when we developed the 2019 year bond program, we looked and worked with the Parks Department to spend $500,000 per year for the 5 years. Part of it is, since it is park recapitalization of playground equipment and equipment that is used, by funding it out over 5 years, then when that park equipment does reach end of life, it is not all hitting the city budget at the same time down the road. It is then spaced out just like this over a 5-year period versus doing it all in 1 year.
Okay, that makes sense. And then for me personally, I'd like to see the Independence Park Phase 2, at least the initial design, moved into 2020 or 2021 if we can. and start some budgeting. I know that's pushed off, but that we've invested too much into that phase one. I think to wait 10 years before we actually get our full use out of that facility. So that would be my preference, is to push the design forward, and then, you know, hopefully eventually have maybe a CMR, if we want to do those with park projects. I assume if we've had success with that that's the direction we may want to go with all our projects. Just CMR.
Sorry, Member Perez, with that project, that is one of the ones that is, if you look down at the funding sources, the future GO bond package. So that's not a funded project at this point. That doesn't mean we can't look at how we advance that moving forward, but just wanted to point out that that's actually was not part of the bond program and it's not a funded project at this point.
Thank you, Trent. Yeah, I had recognized that. That's why I want to try and get at least the design and the budgeting, the construction budgeting moved up, so we can actually take a look at what the cost is and then discuss funding mechanisms in advance of 2024 to 2025. Because at least for me, that's an important project for us to move forward with. I just don't care to have so many of these projects being halfway done and not completed. You know, I'm one of seven, so certainly if there's others that don't want to do that, they can voice their opinion, but it's my preference we get that project moved up. On the facilities, if we can move to that one, to that summary list.
Stand by.
I'll chime in on that phase two of Independence. I get the appreciation to move it up, but I don't necessarily want to start paying engineering fees to get it designed without any way to fund the construction. And I don't see us going out for another bond before 2025. And given all that, I don't know, you know, I'm not a fan of issuing COs for it. So unless there's some other funding mechanism out there, I don't know what moving the engineering up does.
I guess it's a budget, so we can try and find other sources. That's what I'd like to do.
Okay. I mean, if there's realistic other sources out there, then yeah, that's a discussion to be had.
So, but I would like to wait on that for a little while before we go and spend money for engineering on that to get a cost estimate on trying to budget for that.
So let's just. My argument is just not put it off till 2024. I'm not saying we've got to spend money in the 2020 budget year, but maybe move it up in the CIP to 2021 so we can target the design and start pushing for funding mechanisms before we wait till 2024 or 2025 before we even start on it. I just don't want to wait that long before we complete that project. That's all I'm asking. Just move it up in the CIP so we can target some funds in 2021 for design to get a budget, a CMR budget, and start pushing staff to hopefully find some funding mechanisms so we can get that project done.
I'd like to offer my support to that as well. I think that the general feedback from our residents has been that, you know, they wanted to see the additional improvements. I think also trying to work concurrently on a timeline with our Forever Parks Foundation and the things that they're trying to do there as well to, you know, really make that a signature part of the city, putting it off until potentially having it delivered in, I don't know, 29 or 30 or something like that in the future, I think is just too much of a stretch. And if we don't have a price target, it doesn't really, you know, help us to accomplish that goal and deliver something to our residents. So.
Oh, just to clarify, it's scheduled for 2025. So some people will hear 2029 and 30 and run with that. But and again, I'm all for moving it up, but I don't want to spend $1.2 million in engineering without any ideas of where this mythical funding's coming from. And hopefully staff can pull it out. But
the design fee would not be $1.2 million. And to do a PER at best be 100,000, 150,000. That could get us enough information for us to get a CMR contract early on and get a pricing. It's not my expectation that we're spending $2 million on a project without an idea of a funding source.
Okay.
But all I'm requesting is we move it up into the CIP to target getting started on that project earlier. And then we can discuss what we're willing to invest at that time, but I just don't want to wait till 2024 to even begin those discussions.
The point of timeline.
I could jump in real quick and ask Robert. I believe when we did the last bond program, we did do some preliminary work on the future phase of Independence Park. So we have kind of our preliminary design of early work there, Robert, and that's what this cost estimate is based on. So really the next step would be the actual design.
Mr. Epperson and council, I believe that we did do some preliminary work to take a look at the whole package on the rendering of the whole to get some ideas of what we can utilize and what we can do to meet full build out. So I'll need to go back with staff and take a look at that and revisit what the complete package was with our consultant at that time too.
Okay, but for now, let's just move the program up a few years. We can always push it back later if we don't want to spend the money. But I want to try and give the instruction to the citizen, the instruction to the staff and the citizen. I'd like to try and get that project done sooner rather than later, as opposed to pin it for 2024 before we begin. So that's my only request. On facilities, again, I think the answer is going to be the same, Robert, but just for clarification, the fiber backbone project, which was a single project in 2020 to 24, now it's split to several projects. Again, I assume that's the same reason, the same rationale behind the Parker recapitalization.
Councilman Perez, one of the things that we've done throughout the entire CIP to probably answer your question holistically is that we had a lot of programming type projects where we just had a certain amount of funding each year. And what happened is when the limits were identified for that year of funding may or may not be appropriate. So what staff did this year is we took a look at each project individually and developed that budget and then named it and put a project name to it. So that's why you're seeing more projects listed, or what you would consider new projects. There were always projects listed under a program style line item. We've now taken the time to break it out and truly identify the needs, the limits, and what the true budget would be for each project. So that's why you're seeing these now identified with a name and a distance or a start and end point, basically, for each project with a cost.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Fire Station 7 is moved to 2023. I mean, maybe we need to take a look at the impacts of 4. Now that we know that we're funding and moving forward with that, but the Fire Station 7 is on our far east side. I don't think we've really done much in the way of trying to lower response times on the east side. So I feel a little uncomfortable pushing that back. But if Chief believes that he's got coverage and we can continue to move our response times down to the levels that we've tried to program, I think we're trying to. You know what? I don't expect. I can't remember the exact response time we were targeting, but I don't mind it being to 2023 or 2024. But I really feel like that area of town has not yet been serviced and been responded to in any real way. We've rebuilt some stations, but we haven't added service to that side of town. And especially now that we have the ESDs that are helping to fund. Certainly they're not offsetting all their expenses, but they are starting to fund it. The biggest portion of the ESDs is that it is on that side of town. So just potentially want to look at moving that up to funding in maybe at least a year, 2022, maybe 2021. That's my opinion. Bailey Road, I think, is a low priority. I was not a fan of including it in the bond package, but if we're going to look for some flexibility, I don't mind pushing that off a year or two if we need to. Certainly not beyond the 3 years. I don't want it to be another McCard or McCalla where it's 10 years before we get a bond project done, but I don't mind pushing that off, but it's not a high priority for me. And then the thoroughfare planning, we have the expenditure for the thoroughfare planning. I'd like to move that up if we can. See if we can get it completed within the next year. Or let's see, we got it. Well, let me just double check and make sure I'm not pushing too hard. And I'm sorry, John, can you move to the...
Perez, are you on streets now? Is that
yes,
what you
I apologize. I completely forgot to ask to move the streets. It's my fault.
And I'll use this time to interject. Station 7 is on Bailey right there, so I do want to be mindful of the expansion, the timing of Bailey Road expansion with the construction of 7, because the last thing I want to do is put a new fire station there and then start delaying the response times due to construction right in front of the station.
Fair enough. So the thoroughfare update, we've got 150 program for this year, but not another investment until 2022. I'd rather us just come and try to get our thoroughfare plan updated sooner rather than later, particularly if we have to consider a bond issuance in 2024. That gives us more time to identify what projects we may need from a street perspective. And then, Trent, we discussed this a little bit when we were talking at the last meeting about the Berry Rose sidewalks being in just terrible disrepair. I'd like to try and add the reconstruction of those sidewalks into a capital project, because it's just too much for us to ever get done with our current funding mechanism for sidewalk repair. So I think it's going to have to be a capital project. And that kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to just say, we're based on your comments from last week, we're taking a look at those, assessing those, looking at the cost of repair options. Once we have
yeah, and we may have a side conversation. Maybe y'all probably already done this with some standard details, but we may have a side conversation, me, you, and Trent, to just talk about what we can do to prevent that kind of failure on the sidewalks in the future when we do these capital projects. I think they just failed to stabilize underneath the sidewalk or do the subgrade, and now it's going to cost us money to redo it. Trent or Robert, just help me to understand. Do you think there's any benefit to us doing potential bond project to attack sidewalks throughout the city more aggressively than we have? If we look at a bond project in 2024, having a program for us to do a larger scale sidewalk improvement throughout the city, rather than just trails, just like rebuilding the sidewalks along the streets and gap program, being more aggressive about the gap, or do you think that there'd be a benefit to that?
Sure, I think that's something we can look at that point. Have to see where we are on our program and the operational side of things. If there's always a lack of funding there, so similar to a street reconstruction program. So, consider. If
we can add something like that into the CIP in that time frame, 2024, so that we can start targeting a more aggressive approach to fix our ailing sidewalks and connect some of the sidewalks that will never get connected, frankly. along roads that have already been developed in older sections of town where, there's going to be a developer that comes in and puts those sidewalks in. I think that would be a better approach and a more thoughtful approach to solving that problem, which we continue to get complaints about at least once a week. And that's all I have.
Mayor, if I may, I have a few questions. Could we start on slide 6? So I think this is a really important graph. I'm grateful for the efforts of previous councils and staff to continue to bring this rate down. I think we see and hear a lot of numbers about debt, but fundamentally, I think this really shows what's important, which is our ability to continue to service the debt, and it kind of keeps things in perspective. So want to continue to make sure we can maintain or decrease that rate. My question here was, I believe from some of the subsequent tabs, I mean, this of course includes some of those TERS projects. It's my understanding, John, that I mean, we're paying for those now, but the reimbursement, because of the way they calculate interest, I mean, we're going to actually make money off of those. So it's kind of a cash flow. It's kind of a cash flow issue, but it's not. We're not expending the city's resources in a permanent way. That's going to be reimbursed and with extra. Is that the case?
Yes, sir. So the way the TERS reimbursement agreement is structured is that we're reimbursed a set amount of interest over, I believe it's 5 years after the completion of a project. And that interest rate we're being reimbursed for is higher than the one that we're paying. So it should turn out in our favor.
Gotcha. So just for, I think this slide is done correctly, but just for our purposes and for, kind of having a better understanding, to me, those projects feel different. I would just like to see the same slide with that TERS component broken out so I can see what the trend looks like if we're not talking about these distinctly different projects that are going to be completely reimbursed. I think that would be useful for me at least. So I really, like this slide and just think that would be an additional slide that would be helpful. Let me see. Moving on, I have some thoughts on the structured versus the fixed principal thing. If we could move to slide 8. So as the bullet points indicate, and as we've discussed today, I mean, there are other considerations besides how much this costs the city. But I do think that it is important to have a good idea, of what the cost associated with each option is. And this is something that when we did our, several weeks ago, when we had our bond financing discussion, this was included in the packets, and I had some discussions with staff around it. But what I think I still want to see here is, I think there's a right answer in terms of which option costs more. And so it's not just, so of course if we were to switch from our current level principal to a structured principal, we're going to incur $13 million more in interest. But also fundamentally, we want to defer payments as much as possible because of the time value of money. $10 million today is not the same as $10 million, or $13 million today is not the same as $13 million in 2030, because, I mean, there's inflation, which is mainly what I'm talking about, but then of course we also are going to hopefully have more people, more businesses, higher valuations, and be more able to pay that. But I guess what I'm saying is, I think there's a right answer if you can just see, we talked about that $13 million is spread out over 20 years. I think there's a quick analysis that can be done that shows where is that $13 million delta, where does that fall in each of those years over 20 years, and then you discount those by how many years out in advance, what you're projecting the inflation rate to be. And it could be the case
it could be the case that by pushing that out, we're paying less in inflation adjusted dollars with the structured principal versus the level principal, despite incurring more interest. But that's kind of what I want to see. I don't think that would be that difficult. But I mean, essentially, so to put that in one sentence, my notes here say, does the time value of money savings from changing to the structured principal offset the increased interest cost? Is that something that you think would be pretty easy to pull together?
Yes, I think so. And, I will say, the first time that we would use a structured, principal option would be for next year's debt sale. And there's a lot that can change between now and then. And I don't want to go down the slippery slope of doing too many scenarios around how we can structure now opposed to then. What I would suggest is that if City Council is open to pursuing this structured principal option, we'll update the policy and just put the language in there that says that staff should be doing that going forward, and then add early budget input as a component of that capital financing piece. Will be closer to the debt sale date, so we'll have a better idea of what interest rates look like and what the reality is, and we could do something like that in that white paper, and then what we bring back for the actual debt sale will match that, if that's amicable to you.
So if I understand, and I guess what I'm saying is, if we're giving the direction today, in order to feel comfortable kind of with the I don't love the idea of, we're going to pay $13 million more, even if it's spread out across 20 years. That gives me heartburn. But I think that the answer would, so it would be difficult for me to just say, with what I have, let's do that. I think that if you were to look at the fact that once you account for the fact that we're now going to be paying in $20, $30 on some stuff instead of $20, $21, I think that would make that inflation adjusted $13 million a lot less. And so I understand in the future there's the fluctuation with the interest rates and whatever. I mean, could we just do this is just directional, right? So I mean, could we assume a 3% inflation rate and just do a, discount the cash flows just kind of straight line like that?
Well, if we use the 3% and we're selling debt less than that, then we're gonna make money.
We're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all. I hear what you're saying. It's all going to come down to that inflation rate.
And so, I mean, I think, Member Carbone, I think on what we just issued, I mean, it was right around 3%, the rate that we were getting on many of those projects, right? Not the water specifically where we got a really good rate, but for most it was about 3%.
I think the actual inflation rate's been much lower than that over the last couple of years. I think currently it's around 1%.
I think that might be
a little high.
I think that might be CPI, but I think in terms of what we buy at the city, it might be closer to the. And we did some analysis for these construction projects with the 2007 bond. It's like there's a 5% increase year over year with that. So, but I think for consumers, you're probably right. It's probably closer to 1.
Yeah, but I wouldn't tie in the cost of construction rate increases with
financing side.
Yeah, so many other factors that go into it. How cheap the labor is, availability of material, with stuff changing as far as what we can import and export. There's too many factors that affect that it's not really tied to inflation.
Right. Yeah. It's a fair point. So I feel like I'm pretty close to being good with the structured principal option. I would just feel a lot better if if I could see that and not just feel like, in order to smooth the rate out, we're gonna, regardless of how much we're spreading it out, we're costing the people apparently $13 million more.
So what I'm hearing is, if we get the actions for the change, and we can get you that directional sort of heavily caveats, sure. But just show you the assumptions and what we get what you're saying.
Anything going out 20 years, yeah, I appreciate there will be a lot of caveats, but.
Right. But it'll be like one scenario, kind of like Mr. McCarter was saying, that, you know, there's just so many different flavors, even once you choose the structure of how that could come down. So we'll just show that to you, and I think that'll give you the peace of mind that you're alluding to.
Yeah, grateful for that. And then I think my last thing there was, I mean, do we have any sense between these two approaches, what other cities do, what's more common? You know.
Great question. There are cities that do both. I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but there are cities that take both approaches. Both are common, and they're both common.
Okay, gotcha. Just want to make sure we're not switching to some, you know, sketchy accounting maneuver that nobody else is doing. So that's good to hear. And then the last thing, I just wanted to follow up on some of the comments that Member Moore made. You know, I think he's right. I don't know that it was talked about so much necessarily when we were discussing the debt issuances a few weeks ago, but some of the analysis that was prepared for us in that showed that when those 2007 projects that were completed relatively on time, they were done for significantly under what was budgeted versus the ones that have, you know, been delayed that has ended up costing the city several $1 million. So appreciate Member Moore's comments there that we want to try to get these, you know, kicked off within a couple of years. I think Member Perez alluded to it also, but that was a really eye-opening thing for me, just how big the discrepancy was in terms of, you know, we had a positive variance if we did it on time, and a very negative variance for the ones that we did later. Again, going back to inflation and inflation of construction costs and other things. So want to make that a priority. And then just lastly, like others have said, very grateful for all staff's work on this. Know that everybody has a really full plate right now, and appreciate the time on this Saturday morning to walk through all this.
Member Hernandez?
Yes, sir. Well, it's always frustrating whenever everybody kind of goes before you, but a lot of the points I was going to make, I guess, were covered by other members. I guess Member Perez, he made the point of not wanting to trivialize the $13 million. I think Member Orlando touched on that a little bit as well. And I mean, that's, if you just divide it by 20, it's about $650,000 per year. And so in my brain, and if I'm just, you know, the average citizen looking at that and thinking that we're going to take on this additional $13 million, and then I break it down in my head to $650,000, you know, that can be very useful, I suppose. So that was my biggest holdback on moving towards the structured debt. But I think if there's going to be some follow-up on this, I don't necessarily know that I have a huge issue with it if we can figure out a way to make sure that as we stretch the money out, it's more useful. I suppose, let's see, I had a couple things written here on this other page. I think most of everything else was covered. So, I mean, I'm good with most everything else. I guess the only other thing I'll touch on is when I made the comment about the timeline earlier with regards to independence, you know, I'm thinking about the things that have kind of been said already about, you know, past bond packages moving forward. And I mean, it would be contingent upon the voters at that point as well. And, you know, if it does pass, I mean, by the time it gets designed, and then if there's another economic issue, we end up pushing it off into the future again. I mean, there's just, I don't want to, I guess my point was, there's the possibility that it could go that far into the future, and I don't want to wait until that point, 29 or 30 or something like that, you know, and I guess the best possible scenario would probably be like 2026 or something like that, you know, before we can deliver on Independence Park. So that was my comment on the timeline, I suppose. Just trying to provide that clarification. And, but yeah, I think everything else pretty much fine with the comments that other members have made. I've covered most of my questions, and I guess, like I said, if you want some direction, I could be persuaded as of now, just, you know, always trying to find ways to obviously save us money in the long run, and if there's a way that we can justify the 13 million and try to get a better understanding of what, the debt rates would be and what potential inflation would be. I mean, whatever numbers we feel, or rather, I guess maybe John, if you can find out, I guess, what the best faith estimates would be based on, that would be very useful. So I'm not opposed to it, the structured debt option, but I guess my initial leaning would be, I guess we're down more towards the level principle, but I could be persuaded, and I'm not totally opposed to it if it's the will of the rest of the council. That's all I have, other than, obviously, thank you to staff for putting all this together. I mean, there's a lot of information, so it's, obviously a reflection of your hard work, so thank you very much.
So if I could just one follow-up I wanted to ask about, and if you could go back to the slide where it shows the projected debt rate versus growth value. Yeah, that one. So if the taxable value growth was to increase over what is projected, what would that do?
The rate goes down.
The debt rate.
The debt rate would go down, yes, sir.
Okay. And so my question is, how accurate is the taxable value growth rate?
So good question, and I think we did a Thursday packet on this a few weeks ago, but we got our preliminary values in May, so last month, and it was at 13% for 21. I don't want to say problem, but caveat you always add with the preliminary values is they're always higher than the certified values. It always comes down. So our 8% here is a conservative estimate on that 13% preliminary. So that 8% will change between now and when you guys see a budget. We don't see that certified value until July 26th, I believe. It's due to us. So that growth value there will change. And then, the out years, we've seen, we saw a peak in growth in really fiscal year 16, I believe it was. And we've just seen that, just based on activity, building activity in the city, just kind of slow down, just where we are in our growth cycle. So, the 4.5% and staying there in 23 and tapering down in the out years is really just an attempt to be conservative. Because we don't want to show you projections that are unreasonably low. I mean, that's our thinking there.
If I could add, that question, member Moore, in that column is just critical. So it's conservatively based, even from what we're showing there on the 8%, as Mr. McCarter just said. That is the most important column of all this, because and it's just pretty standard with the financial advisors and so forth. The uncertainties when you get out farther and farther, that they don't show zero growth for 29 and 30. So, you hit on it. If things continue to go well overall, that's going to help lower that rate. We pay the same amount, and if we have a bigger base, that's a great thing for everybody. And so that matters a lot.
And if I could just add on that point quickly, not just what the value of current things are set at, but that should also just be something for us to all note that the least painful way, the way for us to make these budget and debt conversations the least painful that we possibly can is to bring in high value entities to the city, in addition to expanding the value of what's already here. But, to be clear, I'm not saying nobody wants their house to double in valuation, have to pay, that much more in property taxes. What I think we need to think about a lot, and I know a lot of members are worried about this as well, is economic development and making sure we bring in these high value things on the business side so we can take some of that burden off of individual homeowners here.
Yep. So and exactly right, and that's what we've all been work on. Community development and PDC. It's the old Matt Buchanan formula of growing that value and that bringing that in, and the Lonzas of the world, the Healthcare Americas, which is taxable in a town center. All those have multiple benefits.
Yeah, and the last several years, we've seen much larger companies coming into the city, which has drastically helped. And PDC's been doing a good job. And, we need to continue to support the economic development of the city to help bring in that taxable value growth. It only helps us. It helps us in multiple different ways. And I'm not sure that it's expressed enough or in detail to council and residents on how that affects the entire budget process and the budget cost of the city.
I guess I'll add, let's caution patting ourselves on the back too much, because almost every EDC project has a 10-year property tax abatement.
Now, remember Carbone, that declines over time, and we're still ahead. So, and that's not true about every PDC project, but point made.
But I was going to ask maybe a similar question. How much of those tax abatements coming off the books is programmed into what we can, or what our bond capacity is, or what our debt rate would be over the next few years?
We'll quantify that for you. I mean, in the scheme of this, it helps, but it's minuscule on $9 billion. So we don't give that many. They're very strategic, and they start out and they decline, unlike some of the other entities around us. So that's all good. So we prefer not to do that when it's necessary to bring a deal. That's what's done, but it's still long-term good. But we'll quantify that for you.
I guess maybe to follow up, this is Lonza's got an abatement. Lonza's going to be a big, probably our largest taxpayer when all their entire facility is all said and done. But that's even when they're paying a full rate, that's not really going to make a huge uptick into our property tax coffers. I'm assuming that's what you're saying, Clay?
No, I mean I would say the abatement side is minuscule in the scheme. I mean, I would look at it as Lower Kirby as a whole. I mean, we've got a goal of $1 billion of valuation that moves the needle. Cumulatively, that whole corridor, the investments and what's being done on 35 corridor and Pearland Parkway corridor and 518 corridor, those cumulatively, overall, I would think about it in terms of the residential to commercial ratio of the tax base. I mean, we want to move that non-residential up steadily, and it's hard. We've got a huge residential base just by where we are, but we're working hard, and council supports that, and we know that to move that ratio up.
Are we able to pull up page 33 of this 192-page document, or it's page 5 of the early budget input session document? Yeah, I think that is it right there, and that doesn't fully break out. I mean, Sugar Land probably has somewhat higher residential property values, but I think anybody who's been to Sugar Land knows about the larger corporate base there. We have similar populations, but our taxable value is 11.2, and theirs is 16.1. A lot of that delta comes from the commercial side, and that enables a lot of their ability to have a lower rate. So I think that's important.
Yeah, it's a little bit. I struggle to use Sugar Land as a target because they developed an inverse. They had the commercial, and then they had the business actually produce the residential. So they didn't have a lot of the initial onset difficulties of a city that's trying to stand up on its own veteran community and then trying to stand up to diversify their income. But I would say Frisco is probably a better guide for us. I mean, they're in the northern part of the state. The northern part of the state's values are significantly higher And that's kind of the model, is if we can, if we can increase the values, if the values go up and we can get more commercial, to where as the values go up, we can lower the rate so it doesn't affect the homeowners. So even though their houses are worth $500,000 as opposed to $300,000 over the, let's say probably maybe like $375 as opposed to $300, their tax bill is basically the same. Cause we're never going to argue to try and lower the evaluation of people's homes. I think that anybody who's argued that we need to write a letter to the state and tell the appraisal districts to lower people's home values, that's just silly. I would never argue against increasing the values of people's homes. What we're trying to do is lower their tax burden, and that's by adjusting the rate. And the best way to adjust the rate is to get more higher value property into the cities so that we can have a more taxable value so that the rate can be lower. So the people who own a $150,000, $200,000 home aren't paying a higher bill.
Clay, on the projected taxable value growth, it's dropping significantly through 2028. Is the reason for that we're reaching maximum build out in the later part?
No, sir. I'm sorry. It's strictly just being conservative and unknowns as you go farther and farther out. So there's no reason to believe that, we won't get that, but, the higher rates, but we just, it's just being conservative.
Okay, so if those rates are more in line with reality over the last few years, then...
Yep. I was thinking when you were talking about that, or somebody was that, it'd be interesting to show what a more realistic compounding would be, like, if we just showed threes for each of those years. It makes a huge difference. So
right.
I think we undersell these sometimes, even with the 8%, that at the front end, if that ends up to be 9 or 10 because of the new growth and everything, and that then you got a bigger base to grow on compounding, and that those rates will come down just if you're looking at that. I'm not, from that factor.
Sure. I mean, in 27, 28, if we have growth rates like we've had in the last few years, then those tax rates should drop significantly.
Yes, sir.
On this page 8 chart, showing the level principal option and the structured principal option, where do those columns show up on the chart on page 10? There's the level principal column on page 8 lines up with our current proposed capital plan, and the structured principal option, I believe, lines up with the level principal.
I think what you're seeing, Member Little, is they kind of set the max rate at 44.5 cents on each. So on the level principal option, it allows you to issue less debt. It's 208, or I'm sorry, it allows you to pay for fewer projects. It's 208 million versus 230 million on the structured principal side. So in order to hold the rate steady, you can do less. So you wouldn't be able to do the full suite of projects. Is that right, John, with if you had the level principal rate at 44.5 cents?
Yes. So that's right. And if you're just looking at the rate on that slide 10, it's the first two columns there. So if you look at and it's a little confusing because on slide 8 here, we're showing out to 2030, and just because we didn't have enough space on slide 10, we're showing out to 2025, so it's a shorter time horizon on there. But if you cut this off right here, after 2025, those tax rates should tie back.
Okay, so those columns on the graph on page 8, the chart on page 8, line up with the first two columns of the graph on page 10, the current capital plan and the structured principal.
Now I'm looking at it, we're off by a quarter here. So this last one on the structured principal should be 44.50.
Okay, that's what was throwing me off. Okay, all right,
yep,
thanks.
You are correct. Apologies.
As far as my position, we kind of live in some uncertain times right now. Nobody knows what the future holds, whether we're going to be impacted by another wave of the COVID-19. So as far as moving projects up to 2021, I'm not really for that. Obviously, driving more debt up in 2021 is going to drive the tax rate higher. So that's kind of how I feel about it. And I think that's all I have for right now. A lot of my other questions were addressed by other council members.
So, Mayor and Council, the structure of the agenda is such that we could go to the enterprise side, and then we could consider the formal action, and we'll definitely follow up on it, but maybe it'd be appropriate now to keep moving and do the enterprise side.
Can I ask one question before we jump away? Back on the facility side, that animal shelter is still projected in there at full budget. And so, I mean, I think we've given some clear direction to try to bring that down. So yeah. I guess that's another variable in this projection.
So that'll help near term. You know, like you said, we got the CMAR. We're very optimistic and positive. I mean, it's not just optimism; it's reality. So yeah, that's just reflecting. Again, probably it's too conservative, but yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
John, you want to move us forward?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Pearson. So at this point, we'll dive into the second section of today's agenda, or this item specifically, the water and sewer back issuances. So looking at kind of the overview and the background here, identical to the property tax side, that the city is legally required to generate enough water and sewer revenue to pay the debt service obligations and cover any of the policy minimums as well. Those are included in the bond covenant. I'll add a note here. For the first time in 21, we will have a separate water and sewer debt service fund, but it's still one rate overall. So it's not two distinct components like we do on the property tax side. It's one rate. And then lastly, I'll note that Raftellus is currently working with staff to update the rate model. That's with the new 3230 plan and making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success doing that projection going forward. So based on where we're at in the process right now, we don't have a rate projection for fiscal year 21. We actually are set next week to lock that in. So not as much detail that we can provide on that currently. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Upton. He can talk about some considerations and the projects themselves.
Thank you, Mr. McCarter. In continuation, city staff also continue to evaluate the revenue projects in the same manner associated with the general fund projects and take a look at each of them. Each of these projects that are listed are critical to the quality of life that we want to provide our citizens. They are not, as we say, nice to have projects, or I wish I could have them, but these are truly quality of life needs. Equipment and pipelines, collection lines are nearing the end of their useful life, and to continue moving forward to replace these and continue to manage the system in a responsible way. So they are a quality of life and a must-need project. Also, in addition, is that the CIP also reflects about little over $12 million in cash-funded projects. This helps offset issuing debt, cash funding coming from impact fees, etc., and those are taking those into consideration. So we are trying to maximize all the funding utilized as a department, as a staff, working together. Next slide, please. With that, you can take a look and realize here's the projects that we have underway. Currently, right now, looking at fiscal year 22, those list of projects. Again, in light of a question that Councilman Perez brought forth, some of these projects were in a program type approach. We've broken those out and given individual names to them and provided those individual budgets proceeding from there. And then you'll see what is projected out in fiscal year 22 and beyond, moving forward with those. At this time, I think this then turns it back to Mr. McCarter to head towards those discussion topics that we'd like to hear from you.
I'm mute myself there. Thank you, Mr. Upton. So yes, with this, we'll open it up for discussion on the prioritization of enterprise funds, and I believe hand it back to Mr. Pearson to kick that off.
Nothing to add, Mayor and Council, if you'd like to talk about this, this is, as described, pretty straightforward, no big surprises, and just moving on these investments. So nothing to add. If council wants to start weighing in, any questions, happy to get that.
I'm probably paying the closest enough attention. I think all these are definitely needs, not wants. The only thing I think maybe is a future conversation is as the cities to our south continue to expand their development, is there any opportunity for us to provide more water from our surface water treatment plant and make them customer cities and potentially offset some of the costs of that project?
So I'll start, and then Robert, the door's open. We would need them to commit to, paying. So we have the capacity, we have the ability, but our design's coming along. We'll have our first millions of gallons available, but there's been interest, and then the ball's in their court to formalize and say what they want and how much they want to pay for it.
So programmatically, we're prepared for that. As long as they ask, we're willing to help. Everything else, I think, is they're on the water side, much needed project. So I'm happy to move forward with it.
I guess a high level. I know we've seen these rehab, the lift station rehab projects coming. It seems like are they all just hitting end of life right now? I mean,
good question, Robert.
I think I would start characterizing it as we've got a large amount of lift stations, and we haven't had an extensive program to make sure that we assess the critical nature of the condition of those, and then prioritize those to do those rehabs. We haven't had a program in place where we would do that. It's been more of a piecemeal, fix this, duct tape this, and keep them working. Whereas with the number we have and the extensive nature of our system, we really need this programmatic approach.
Councilman Carbone, I'd like to also add in what Mr. Epperson has been saying as well, is that we are nearing completion of our wastewater master plan and model, which is also evaluating and giving an assessment to all of our lift stations. The further is that we have about approximately 70 lift stations throughout the city, and as Mr. Epperson has stated, there hasn't been a formal program to really address those as needed. Usually lift stations last with normal maintenance, about 15 years, and we have several that are well beyond that life expectancy, and they're finally hitting up to where we just can't repair them anymore. So in that type of expectancy, you would start to see about 5 to 7 lift stations a year in rehab of some sort. We're just seeing a lot now pop up because they are well beyond their useful life, and that's what's happening.
Okay, thank you. And what's the term of the debt we're issuing specifically for these lift stations? I mean, I assume we're matching it up to the 15-year life?
Yes. I believe it's, I'd have to follow up on that with the specific. The standard water and sewer overall is 30 years. I don't know those specifically. I can follow up on that.
Yeah, I think the plant's 30, but the general is 20, and so we'll look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Trent, just kind of maybe dovetail into what you had said. Would we say that that's the same rationale for why all these ground storage tanks and elevated storage tanks are coming up for rehab at the same time?
Absolutely. It's really not having a comprehensive program in place of assessing the condition of those and making those on a regular basis. And so it's the same type of program as a lift station.
Okay. And I guess maybe while we're on the subject, do we not have any program right now to expand our ground storage or elevated storage capacity? We feel like we have enough.
Robert, you want to take that one?
Yes, sir. Councilman Perez. Yes, we just recently did a ACR, which is a review of our capacity in relation to what TCEQ needs and meet those standards. And we actually have right at a little bit more capacity in the air or in the elevated storage tanks than we need based on our readjustment of our capacity requirements. So we are good in shape there. And same with our ground storage tanks, but however, we want to make sure we have enough to supply in terms of peak day demand. So we'll have a couple more ground storage tanks with the surface water treatment plant, and we'll meet all of our requirements currently right now.
And what's that metric? Is it like service for a day or for a week?
It's served on a per capita basis. I'd have to get the formal formula right now, but it's on a per capita on a peak day demand.
Okay.
If there's nothing further on the enterprise side, I think that would conclude agenda item 1 that we have. The last call, if there's any other follow-ups or questions you'd like us to pursue.
Yeah, I have a question on this. With the, and I'm trying not to pull any of this into a topic that's not what we're discussing about, but with any of the overage and the budget that we had presentation on, what's the breakdown on usage of any of those funds into the CIP for the water sewer?
So the water sewer doesn't have that kind of flexibility. So, I mean, we don't have overage there.
So what I'm talking about is where we were talking about budget amendment where we had like, I don't know, 3.4 or something million in there. And so I guess my question is how does this relate to the CIP for the water and sewer? What is that going to do?
So that number was strictly on the general side, had nothing to do with the enterprise side, so zero to do with water and sewer.
Okay, so nothing out of the CIP side.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I guess maybe to try and get into what we're going to be discussing in the next in our next meeting. If these are needs or not wants, and I assume we're programming this based on holding steady on our water sewer rate, correct?
That's the goal, but I mean, there's lots of factors that go into that. I mean, there's ratio coverages, there's maintenance, there's salaries, but that's, you know, we projected plan that increase, but a lot depends, but we're going to do our best to bring you a package that it minimizes or has that flat.
Okay, so if we are looking at lowering or making an adjustment to the rate to either keep it flat if that's not their staff's recommendation, or to lower the rate, I think it would be incumbent upon us as council to take a look at what CIP projects, or I'm sorry, prize fund projects we would need to postpone or be willing to postpone in order to justify that.
Yeah. If it gets to that point, we'd identify some items that would have to be pushed, but and the same logic goes for what we talked about. It'd be less on the enterprise side, but I mean less on the capital side versus operation maintenance side. Yeah,
I guess I'm just trying to make sure that we as a council understand that that's what we would need to be sacrificing. And if we were going to have that discussion and talk about those type of sacrifices, you know, between now and then, we have a list of the projects that are going to be funded over the next few months. So perhaps maybe take some of the burden off the staff and come up with our own ideas about what we think we can postpone if that's what we want to justify. And then just one thing on a sanitary project. It's still early I'm sure it's real early in the design phase, or we've not gotten too far into it, but the Berry Road Water Treatment Facility, when we do that expansion, can we include a masonry wall as part of that project. Right now it's chain link fence, which is honestly, it's not allowed by anybody else other than the city. So it's outside of our design standard, but it's also right up against a major corridor. We've got a tract of land there that probably will never develop unless there's some way to separate it from the treatment plant. It may still not develop, but at least it gives us some potentiality of separating that facility from the tract of land, and gives us a higher opportunity to have somebody do something with it. So just something to program into the design of that.
Right, that project and that expansion will meet the UDC. So.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I'm sorry, that project it will meet the UDC for that expansion, so it'll include the required barriers and between the commercial and the plant.
I don't know if we have anything in the UDC that specifically requires masonry along treatment facilities. Unless I'm misreading it. Look, and we don't have to bury into the details. I just want to make sure that, you know, that facility and future facilities, we're not going cheap with these chain link fences that are just meant to offer security. But, you know, we, particularly on these major corridors, we're trying to do something that at least hide our back of house facilities, and then, you know, not depreciate the value of the adjacent property owners.
So without any other ones, we'll close off this agenda item, and I think it'd be appropriate if somebody would introduce the next item, please.
If I could, just one last question. There's only a few minor projects on here that are not already tied to another project that's in progress or is you know, funded outside of any revenue bonds, and that they're also could be postponed with only moderate inconvenience. Is there anything? I mean, if we was to suspend this for 6 months or a year, I mean, what does that do for us? Does it buy us anything? Does it, you know, does it get us in worse trouble? Does it save us any more money? Because Mr. Upton, you know, talked about how some of these things are, you know, near of end of life and they're having to band-aid and duct tape to keep it going. But does it buy us anything to postpone anything for 6 months or so?
I think your largest projects there are driven by regulations with the wastewater plant expansions. And then we've already, as Mr. Upton explained through the project presentation, we've gone through the projects and modified the kind of when we're going to sell that based on the current status of the project and the cash flow necessary to move this project forward. And we'll continue to look at that as we move forward. But there's not any real big dollars here. They're not tied to projects that have to move forward.
So I'll point out the next, the South Corrigan Transite water line replacement. We just sent you a note about that Transite program. We're only doing 3 miles a year out of 60 that we have. So, and that's the stuff that breaks. So it'd be a deferral that would cost us and get us farther and farther behind for that example.
Ask the questions.
Thanks. Yep. Can somebody put up the agenda so we can see that, please?
You guys done a pretty good job so far, and let's move into our item number 2. Councilmember Carbone, would you introduce this for our discussion? You might read the verbiage that pertains to the reason.
Joshua, John, can you put the agenda up, please?
All right, thank you, Mayor. Consideration and possible action resolution R 2020-119. Resolution amending the city's comprehensive financial management policy statement. So moved.
We have a motion?
Councilman Moore.
I see several lifts. I think one of us was a yes. Second. We're in discussion. Staff report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So the city has guiding financial policies that cover a number of our investments and how we take care of our stewards of public funds. This particular one is a recommendation for modification to specify the type of debt issuances that we would be issuing going forward. The tradition has been towards the, I want to make sure I get this right, for the level principal, but that had not been stated. We would recommend that we look at this structured principal as to go into the financial policy, and we'd use that as our guide going forward. So we've talked about the implications of that, and you know, the pros and cons. We'll follow up with some additional information about the time value of money and with some assumptions, but overall, you know, based on impact on the rates and flexibility for us and the uniqueness of the TERS, we believe that the structured principal will be the appropriate route for us. Nothing to add, sir.
Okay, moving in our agenda, back to our agenda item. Council have any question or comment regarding this proposed staff comments?
Yeah, so when would be when would we target or look at targeting adding a discussion and the addition of this the financial management policy about setting a cap for the debt rate versus the tax rate?
So the reality is that you know, we talked about our next early budget input in February, that we would show, you know, if we got this piece done, and then the TERS would be that much closer. The reality is with the infrastructure needs and the capital needs and the operation needs, that we could show, you know, what it is and move that forward at early budget input.
Early budget input for 2021?
Sorry? Yeah, yeah, I mean, because that's in February of 21, yeah.
Okay. So we're not looking at making that change now. We're just going to spend the time between now and the early budget input to find out what we can do to program something. I guess, you know, obviously we're not prepared to add that yet, but I want to make sure that we have a discussion item. We're giving you maybe more clear guidance about whether or not we want to make a move in that direction, whether there's enough fortitude from the council for us to try and implement that, and then maybe structure how we would want to space that out. That way you're not cutting it from whole cloth in February, and you've got some guidance from us, maybe preemptive of that. I'm not opposed to the timing. I just want to make sure that we're giving you an understanding of what it is that we want you to program.
No, we've heard that, and we brought that up for this today, that it's out there. But you know, the reality is that talking about it, you know, this year doesn't change anything and is not practical. And we'll show that now that if we get this structure question done, that certainly, you know, makes it more feasible and realistic and gives us something to measure on.
I'm sorry, Tony, did you finish?
Yeah, I was just gonna, I mean, we're adding one line and it says the city will issue. And this will be one that the attorney loves. Should it be a will, or can we say the city can? And basically, can we give the flexibility to staff that yes, we want you to pursue the structured principle, but not force you to go to structured principle if we get preferential rates or some other factors change in the future?
From a legal perspective, yeah, the can would give more flexibility, whereas the will removes that flexibility.
But if I'm understanding correctly, by going to the structured rate, that gives us the flexibility inherently to do something that matches the level, or something that does not. I think it's by adopting the structured principle, that gives the flexibility to staff to make the decision from year to year about what we're putting the principal and what we're putting to interest.
I think Member Carbonne's point's bigger than that about if he's talking about more the interest rates and longer term, that, you know, if there's some strange reason that it was advantageous, at least give that, you know, consideration. So.
Yeah, but I mean, does that mean that we switch from level to structured without council input from year to year, or from half decade to half decade?
I think it's going to be a discussion going forward every time we issue debt when the financial advisor outlays the future cash flows of each bond issuance, and the structured portion will show what principal is projected now and into the future. So I guess what I would like is if staff and the FA say, hey, look, this structure is seeming weird in the market, and we can get a better rate if on this small issuance if we go straight level principal and it doesn't have a major effect. I'd want to have the flexibility to pursue that without having to come back and change this policy.
Tony, if you want to make the amendment, I'll second. I think that's a good find, and if Gary for this blessing.
I'll trust your judgment on it, Tony. I think there's, as long as we're not leaving things too relaxed and we're not providing appropriate guidance, if we feel comfortable that will and can modification doesn't make things so inflexible that the whole structure falls apart. Again, you know the system better than I do, but that's good with me if you believe that's the best.
Jeff, you're comfortable with that?
Yes.
All right. Mayor, I'll make a motion to amend the verbiage to say the city can versus the city will. So moved.
We have a motion and a second. We're in discussion.
I'll second.
Okay. Madam Secretary, would you want to vote on that item?
Councilmember Orlando?
Aye.
Councilmember Carbone?
Aye.
Councilmember Little?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Hernandez?
Aye.
Councilmember Perez?
Aye.
Councilmember Owens?
He's on the
Okay.
For the meeting.
Motion passes 6-0
and that's on to amend.
to amend, yes.
Amend, okay. We're now working with amended motion. Is there any further discussion on the amended motion?
Well, I just had a question there. No changes or anything. I was just, for clarification, just for my own curiosity. Under Section 5, A, it says general fund unrestricted. I'm just curious why it's 2 to 3 and not a hard number like 3.
With the speaker that just spoke, would you identify yourself?
This is Hernandez.
Okay.
I can answer that. We in 2018, actually the last time that this was amended, we had a discussion at the early budget input session, and the consensus of council was we wanted to move the policy before that was 2 months of operating expenditures, which was actually below 16.666%. And the consensus from council is we want to increase that amount. And rather than do a hard and fast, we want to move to 3 months. We moved it to that scale so we could build up that policy over a number of years and not be in violation of the policy. I think once we get to that 3 months, we will amend it so it just says 3. But the range is there to allow us that time to kind of build up to that target goal of 3 months in total expenditures.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the clarification on that. I was just curious. Thank you.
Good. Council, have any further question or comment on the amended motion? Madam Secretary, I believe we've got a motion second on the floor.
Councilmember Orlando?
Aye.
Councilmember Carbone?
Aye.
Councilmember Little?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Hernandez?
Aye.
Councilmember Perez?
Aye.
The motion is amended to include the terms that the city can versus the city will.
Okay. Moving in our agenda to item number 5. I will adjourn this meeting at 11:34. You guys did a good job. I appreciate that. And the staff, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Monday.
Did a great job. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Monday. we can